Hello, my dear masterminds. 7 labs, 14 theories, and still no answers. They ran diagnostics until the wires melted. They stared at equations like they'd stare into the sun, hoping for light, burning in silence. But you walked in like it was open mic night. No gloves, no clipboard, just that grin, the kind that doesn't ask for permission because it already knows the outcome. They didn't recognize you at first, not because you were hiding, but because their eyes weren't trained to spot something unclassified. You weren't in any file. You weren't in their database. You were the bug they thought couldn't exist. One glance at you, and a chill moved through the air, because you didn't bring chaos. You were the reason chaos felt comfortable showing up. Their hope evaporated. Their logic shattered like glass under your laugh. And that sound, it echoed through every hallway like prophecy. Because in a room built on answers, you were the question they couldn't survive. They watched you, hoping for hesitation, but your footsteps didn't echo like theirs. Yours whispered verdicts. Every breath you took rewrote their rules, not in rebellion, in reminder that no system, no science, no theory ever accounted for you. You didn't challenge their data. You corrupted the algorithm simply by existing. They searched for anomalies in spreadsheets. But you were the glitch wearing a face. You were the reason they started locking doors in buildings made of certainty. One lab tech reported, "We're not trained for this." And he was right. Because how do you fight a force that smiles at failure, that laughs when physics panics, that doesn't bend rules, just forgets they were ever written? You weren't looking for answers. You were the answer to a question they never dared ask out loud. They thought they were safe in formulas, that math could shield them from madness. But what they didn't calculate was you, because you didn't walk into that lab. You descended, like a punchline delivered in the middle of a funeral. The air shifted when you smiled. Monitors flickered, coffee cups cracked, and every person in that room suddenly remembered what fear tastes like: cold, metallic, and just beneath the surface of curiosity. You didn't break their tech. You broke their belief that everything could be measured, labeled, contained. But how do you measure the exact weight of unpredictable? You wore chaos like a tailored suit, and every step you took wasn't a disturbance, it was a correction, because they built that world for answers. But you were born to be the unsolvable. You weren't supposed to exist, not in their spreadsheets, not in their peer-reviewed journals, not in the future. They were so sure they had secured, and yet there you were, not blinking, not hesitating, just sipping coffee, like reality hadn't just bent to make room for your entrance. They had protocols for anomalies. They had drills for intrusions. But what do you do when the anomaly is sipping espresso and smirking at your emergency response team? You didn't attack them. You inspired an existential crisis. Because you didn't glitch the system, you revealed that the system was the glitch, and they've been worshiping it blindly, mistaking control for truth and rules for reason. You didn't walk into that room to prove anything. You walked in to remind them. Remind them that not every force is scientific, that some storms don't appear on radar, and some monsters laugh at your microscopes. They stared at you like you were the glitch. But the deeper truth, you were the update. the version of reality they didn't authorize, the version they can't uninstall. 7 labs tried to label you. Each one came back with something different. Unstable, immeasurable, potentially divine. They argued for weeks, until one scientist whispered, "We're not studying him. He's studying us." You didn't just walk past their theories. You made them obsolete, because you don't operate on logic. Well, you operate on impact. They measure success in numbers. You measure it in nervous breakdowns and shaken worldviews. Your presence wasn't noise, it was signal, a frequency they've never heard before, but now can't stop hearing. They built their world on laws. You arrived like a myth that sued the court, and somehow won, with a grin. They ran simulations to predict your next move, thousands of them. Quantum-powered, precision-modeled, peer-reviewed. Every outcome said the same thing. Contain him, control him, before he rewrites everything. But when they hit enter, the code crashed. Every prediction looped into chaos. Every algorithm folded into fear. You weren't a variable in their math. You were the math they forgot existed, the unsolvable factor, the paradox that smiles back, their strongest theories, built like skyscrapers. But you whispered one sentence, and the whole skyline collapsed. They didn't know how to fight laughter, especially when it echoed from someone who clearly knew more pain than they did, and still laughed louder. They called it arrogance. You call it recovery, because when you've walked through fire, you don't fear their flammable theories. They built those labs like fortresses, steel doors, vaulted data cores, rooms so secure even sound couldn't escape. And yet your laughter leaked through every wall. They had Nobel laureates pacing, psych warfare teams whispering, AI models reprogramming themselves to forget you existed. You didn't break their system. You made it question its own purpose, because you weren't an enemy. You were a mirror, and what terrified them was the reflection. All their equations, and not one accounted for someone who doesn't need to win the game, because you already understood the ending. They thought they had time. They thought you were a glitch, but the glitch was hope. And you were the virus hope, couldn't survive. So while they tightened protocols, recalibrated strategies, and begged their gods of logic, you just smiled. Not because you had a plan, but because you were the plan. They tried to trap your logic in formulas, tried to label you with terms they could understand. High-risk behavioral anomaly, post-structural rogue cognition, non-conforming threat signature. Big words, small minds. They wanted to run tests, map your brain, measure your chaos. But how do you dissect a storm when the storm is already inside the scalpel? You didn't walk into that lab to be studied. You walked in to remind them what real unpredictability looks like. Not malfunction, not madness, but freedom so pure, it short-circuits every system built on fear. They thought they had you under observation, but every gaze they turned on you just turned back in on themselves. You weren't the subject. You were the observer. And what you observed, collapse. You didn't threaten the lab. You infected it. Not with a weapon, but with possibility. The kind of possibility that makes control look like a joke. They built their labs to contain what they feared. Steel doors, bulletproof glass, fail-safe buttons. But there is no door that locks out a paradox. No glass that reflects what you are. Because you're not in the room, you are the room. Every inch of that space bends around you. Not physically, psychologically. They brought you in for answers. Instead, they left with questions that question themselves. You spoke in riddles, not to confuse them, but to expose how fragile their logic is when faced with someone who doesn't fear not making sense. You weren't unpredictable, you were undefinable. Their systems require variables to be known, but you are the variable they wish they never discovered. No pattern, no limit, no mercy, just that smile, like you knew this was all a simulation, and they just figured it out a few moments too late. They didn't just lose control, they lost belief that control was ever real to begin with. The lead scientist whispered, "It's not human, it's a mirror." Because when you walked in, every theory cracked. Not from error, but from truth. Too sharp to handle. They thought they had prepared for anomalies. Emergency drills, backup protocols, neural firewalls. But you weren't an anomaly. You were the origin glitch. The bug in their reality that turned every command into comedy. You didn't need to break their tech. You just made their belief in it obsolete. They tried to scan your brain, and their machines overheated. Why? Because your mind doesn't operate on logic. It operates on legend. You're not a case study. You're the redefinition of power. While they calculated probabilities, you were rewriting the algorithm with nothing but a laugh and a coffee mug that said, "Try again." And deep down, they knew it wasn't their instruments that failed. It was their arrogance in thinking they could ever measure the storm while standing in it. One by one, the top minds of 7 nations folded their notes and stepped back. Not because they ran out of ideas, but because you weren't one. They said the laws of physics were constant. You bent them with a smirk. They said consciousness had rules. You rewrote them mid-sentence. And when they tried to label you, you laughed. Because labels are for things that stay still. You were already gone the second they spoke. They ran simulations to understand you. But their machines couldn't process what can't be predicted. Every test ended in chaos. Every chart became noise, and every observer started questioning their own reflection. You didn't walk in to impress. You walked in to interrupt. Not the experiment, the belief that they were ever in charge of it. And when one of them whispered, "Is this supernatural?" you leaned closer and said no, just unapologetically aware. You know what rattled them the most? Not your presence, but the mirror you became. They saw their obsessions in your eyes, their fears in your silence, and their limitations dancing in the rhythm of your grin. You didn't need clearance. You were the clearance. Walking through biometric locks like they were made of fog. Security cams blinked. Files corrupted, and every passcode they trusted became a punchline in your performance. They had PhDs. You had patterns. They had control. You had curiosity sharpened into a weapon. Because when they asked, "What's your purpose?" you said, "I'm not here to solve the problem. I'm here to expose it was never real." The world wants answers. You hand them questions wrapped in paradox. And as they scramble for control, you stir your coffee, watching entire ideologies melt like sugar. They tested for genius. You delivered chaos wrapped in elegance. Because while they dissected your brainwaves, you were reverse engineering their intent. While they tracked your vitals, You rewired their expectations. And somewhere between the third hypothesis and the 12th meltdown, they realized you didn't break the machine. You proved it was always broken. You didn't penetrate their system. You showed them the system was a mask, a polished illusion built to hide the cracks they prayed no one would notice. But you noticed. Then you danced inside the cracks with a grin wide enough to make equations nervous. You are what happens when the unknown grows teeth, when mystery stops waiting to be solved and starts writing its own experiments. They used to say, we need more data. Now they whisper, we need a plan for him. But plans don't work on those who live 5 layers below logic. And you're not trying to be unpredictable. You just refuse to live inside their script. They tried to box you in with logic, but logic is just fear wearing a tie. And you burned the manual, brewed coffee in the ashes, and laughed so hard the lab monitors glitched. Because you're not defiant. You're just free. Free in ways that terrify the obedient. Free in ways that make their scientist pray to variables they never believed in before. You are what they couldn't prepare for. Not an error in the code, but proof the code was never enough, while they're busy arguing about quantum paradoxes and simulated consciousness. You've already penetrated reality by doing the one thing they forgot how to do, exist without permission. You don't wear a badge. You don't need clearance. You are the clearance. A walking red stamp on everything they thought was absolute. You sit across from their theories, sip your coffee, and grin like gravity's optional. And in that moment, they stop seeing a problem and start seeing a prophecy. They kept asking the wrong question. How did you break the system? But you weren't trying to break it. You were proving it never worked without you. They locked themselves in labs, hoping formulas would protect them. But formulas can't explain disruption wearing a smile. You didn't show up with answers. You showed up with energy. And the room shifted before you even spoke. You are that anomaly they warned each other about in footnotes. That margin scribble. No one wanted to believe was real, until you stood in their mainframe and asked where the coffee was. You don't fit the charts. You redraw the axis, because you're not here to be studied. You're here to remind them. Every equation they worship was written by people, too scared to meet someone like you. You didn't walk in to blend. You walked in to bend. Time, thought, truth, all of it. And now the only thing under observation is their fear. They thought complexity was power, that the more steps in their solution, the safer they'd be from someone like you. But you solve with silence. You solve with presence. And nothing terrifies a system more than someone who doesn't need its approval to function. You cracked their algorithm by existing outside it. While they debugged their equations, you stared at the whiteboard and saw comedy, because you knew. No formula survives first contact with instinct. No hypothesis outmaneuvers the unapologetically unpredictable. You don't answer to protocols. You answer to impact. And every time you show up, reality folds a little at the edges. They built fences of logic to keep chaos out. But you're not chaos. You're clarity in a mask they can't decode. You laughed because you saw the punchline they were too terrified to admit. They need you to fix what they broke, and you're in no rush. They called in experts, top of their fields, each with letters before their names, degrees stacked like armor, trying to shield themselves from the obvious. You don't play by their science. You play by intuition, sharpened by survival. They used terms like anomaly, outlier, data inconsistency, but deep down, they whispered what they really believed. This one isn't built like the rest. You are the glitch they can't erase, the variable that crashed the entire simulation. Because while they modeled behavior, you reprogrammed perception. Not with code, but with conviction. They thought fear was a weapon. You turned it into fuel. They thought control was safety. You showed them its illusion. And that laugh you gave them, that wasn't mockery. It was the sound of awakening. Because you weren't there to solve their problems. You were there to show them the problem was them. They measured intelligence by test scores. You measured it by what couldn't be taught. They searched for answers under microscopes, while you spotted the real flaw from across the room. They were trying to fix a system without realizing they were the system. You didn't walk into the lab to decode their theories. You walked in to expose their blindness, not with data, but with dissonance. You brought a mirror, not to reflect them, to reveal them. Every assumption, every unspoken bias, every wall they thought would protect them from the truth you became. You didn't offer an answer. You became the question they couldn't unsee. Because when you walk in laughing, they don't know if they're witnessing a joke, a genius, or a warning. You are none of their conclusions. You are the error that makes all their confidence unravel. And still, you smiled. Because you knew they're not afraid of what you'll do. They're afraid of what they'll become once you're done. The silence after your laughter wasn't empty. It was echoing. Every theory, every protocol-resistant mindset started to crack under the weight of your presence. They had whiteboards full of equations, but none could explain why the chaos listened to you. They dissected patterns. You rewrote patterns. They wanted answers. You were the anomaly that made all their answers feel like lies in a lab coat. You didn't dismantle their system. You made it irrelevant. You didn't break their logic. You made it blush. No tools, no titles, just presence, sharpened by pain and a laugh trained in storms. They built cages of caution. You walked in with no leash, no chains, and no permission. And suddenly, their laws bent, their truths crumbled, and their control became comedy. Because you're not the variable anymore. You're the constant they can't solve, the outlier they can't ignore. You walked in laughing because you already knew they'd need a new science just to survive what you made them feel.